Welcome to the Brainiate Show, where we talk about all things Salesforce, sharing the coolest features, solutions, and best practices to turn you into a Salesforce rock star. Here's your host, former attorney turned Salesforce consultant and trainer, David Giller.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I am super excited to have you guys here with me. And as you can see, when you do a live show, we are having a technical issue. Jen was on with me for the last half hour plus, and we were testing out all of the scenes and the camera settings, and all of a sudden her computer froze on her. And so I'm messaging with her right now to get her back on, and hopefully that's going to happen real soon. I can actually still see her screen on my side, but I don't have her camera, and I don't know if her entire computer froze or what. She might have to even restart her computer. Technical glitches. Anyway, today, hopefully, Jen is going to join us, and she is going to be talking about two really important topics. If not, I'm going to improvise and we'll come up with something, but we'll make it work. There's Jen in the comments saying she froze. Jen, I'm wondering if maybe even just restarting your computer yeah, she's okay. So now she's off. Well, Jen, if you can still see this, maybe restarting your computer will make it all come back. I'm hoping we can actually do this. So Jen is going to be talking about, hopefully, two really important topics. The first one is how to keep your Salesforce org organized through governance. Having some consistency as it relates to naming conventions, filling out the description field, doing things in a certain way on a regular basis. Here we go. Jen is back. There she is. Jen, we have you back here. On a regular basis. Here we go. Jen. Oh, headset might be in order, and I might need to do the same thing. We actually didn't have that issue before. Jen, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
And we can hear you. Amazing.
Awesome.
Don't forget, you need to share your screen
Yes.
in eCam. So the first topic that Jen is going to be talking about is how to keep your Salesforce org organized through governance. And it's not nearly as painful as you might initially think. And the second topic is going to be on everything associated with, well, I shouldn't say everything. 3 really cool features associated with Flow. And I'm not going to steal Jen's thunder. I will let her explain what that is all about. But before we go further, I just also wanted to explain for those who are new to the Brainiate Show, to the live show, this show is broken up into 3 different segments. The first one is more conceptual, of explaining some strategic best practices of doing things either for your career or in Salesforce, or with regard to handling of Salesforce projects. And the second segment is where we're sharing a screen showing how to do something, how to use a particular feature, how to set something up in Salesforce. And the third is open Q&A. So if at any point any of you have any Salesforce related question, either about something that we are talking about now during the show or anything else Salesforce related, by all means, just throw it into the comments and we will get to it in that last segment. Before we go further, I just want to call out the sponsor for this week's show is Descript. Many of you have heard me talk about Descript, a tool that I absolutely love. I cannot work without it. So this tool is for editing any audio and video files. If you've ever tried to edit an audio file or a video file, you know how painful it can be. Well, with Descript, if you know how to edit a Google Doc, and I don't know anyone who doesn't know how to edit a Google Doc. If you know how to edit a Google Doc, that's how easy it is to edit your audio or video files, especially with spoken word, because that's what it's really all about, in Descript. So I use Descript. The most common use case that I would recommend for all of you as Salesforce professionals: if you're in a Zoom meeting, you're recording the Zoom meeting with a client, or working on a project, someone's sharing best practices. Here's what we need. Here's our process of what we're trying to do. Here's what we would like to do in Salesforce. They're sharing their screen. You've got the recording of the Zoom meeting. You take that recording, you throw it into Descript. It turns it into a transcript. It allows you to easily enhance the audio, because if you've ever tried listening to the audio from a Zoom recording, the audio usually sucks. It enhances the audio. It turns it into a transcript that allows you to quickly remove all of the filler words like and like, It allows you to instantly click a button and it deletes all of the dead space. Like when someone says, oh, let me look for that spreadsheet, and 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 2 minutes pass. It deletes all of that. It allows you to quickly turn that one meeting recording into segmented recordings, so snippets that you can then share with your colleagues, incorporate into a Jira ticket, a Trello ticket, whatever you're using to capture the business requirements and turn it into an actual business requirements documentation. Anyway, I love Descript, and that's why I became an affiliate of Descript. I use it every single day for a ton of different things. But this show is not about Descript. So let's move on to our first segment. And I need to get Jen's screen back up here, because that's what we had before. And it got botched up when... Jen, you're not showing your screen. Can you share your screen on your side?
Okay, let me try again.
And then it will show up for me. Oh,
right.
And it's automatically there.
Yay.
Jen, this is all you. I'll try to be quiet.
All right. It wouldn't be a live stream without glitches, right?
Yep. It's part of the memories that we're all going to have about it.
Awesome. So I'm Jennifer Lee. I also go by Jen, but never call me Jenny. I don't like Jenny. You can reach me on Twitter at my handle, Jen W. Lee. On LinkedIn, Jennifer W. Lee. And I also gave you my Trailblazer ID login. All right. Okay, and you can also connect with Salesforce admins on our website, admins@salesforce.com, Twitter handle, Salesforce admins, no I, and Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, Salesforce admins. All right, so we're going to talk about organizing your org. But first, I want you to think about how you felt when you started a new job and there was absolutely no guidance, no documentation, no processes for anything for you to follow. You're just like, here's our org, here you go. Or, you had to fill in for a coworker and couldn't make heads or tails of their work in Salesforce. Or what if you were in an org and everyone did things whichever way that they wanted to? There was no rhyme or reason. Everyone had their own way. So for me, I wouldn't feel very comfortable walking into that. And I would feel a little lost with having no structure in place, no common guidelines to follow. So here's what you can do. You can take control and organize your org. Like, let's say you're new, you walked into an org that doesn't have any structure in place. Find out why, and, be empowered to lead the charge and put some structure in place so that it's not chaotic and the wild, wild west. Consider establishing those standards and guiding principles for your org for everyone to follow who builds in your Salesforce org, whether they're admins or developers. But why do you need this, right? It drives overall consistency across your org. It also helps onboard new hires, or if you have contractors, consultants that will work in your org for a small period of time, right? It puts boundaries around, how you organize and work in your org. It's also an easier way for others to pick up work. If we're all consistently doing things a certain way, then you don't have to figure out, well, Bob did it this way and Sarah does it this other way, right? So it's not really up to everyone's own interpretation as to how they do things in Salesforce. So really, controlling that chaos. So you could establish standards and guidelines. So they're essentially you laying out the ground rules for people to follow. So some things to consider, and these would be documentations that you would need to work on over a period of time, right? And then these would be the source of truth that anyone working in your org would have to follow, right? These are things that you can reference. And what I ended up doing at my previous company was we had those set of documents, you get alignment, and then you routinely review them. They're living, breathing documents. You routinely review them. I typically did it after each Salesforce release and, made changes, took into account things from the release that we wanted to incorporate going forward. But these are things that you would have to take ownership and continue to maintain so they don't fall over the wayside. So things like specifying naming conventions. I know it's fairly simple, right? Naming conventions of things like objects, your validation rules, flow, code. So everyone's following the same thing. It's not validation rule, account 1, account 2. You kind of know what it is that these things are trying to do. Use that description field where it is in the org, right? Your future you will thank you, as well as those who are currently working in the org or will work in the org. How many times have you created a field and then you're like, why was that a checkbox field? Why did I do it that certain way?
By the way, all of us think that we're going to remember in the future.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, we forget. Like as a Salesforce professional, regardless of your specific role, you're juggling too much to be able to really remember every nuance of every project and every request.
Exactly.
So we forgot.
Yeah. And if it's a field where you have data coming from an upstream system or downstream system, note that in the field, because if you go and make changes to it, guess what? It might impact the upstream or downstream system, and you need to get those people involved as well, right? You don't want to make a change to pick list or the way that it's named, but it's dependent on something upstream or downstream. Now you broke the system, right? And also with flow elements, like flows can be really complicated. Give a description as to what this flow is supposed to do. Or if you have auto launch flows, those could be fired from anywhere, from a button, from a process build, from code, right? Like if you didn't build it and then you have to go troubleshoot it or make enhancements to it, how are you going to know where it was invoked from? Like that's going to be a treasure hunt for you. So the more information that you could, it takes a couple of seconds to put in this information in the description field, but it will be helpful to someone down the road, yourself or a colleague. And also think about least privilege access. So we always have, as admins, have to have a security mindset and keep your org secure. So make sure, having least privilege access means giving the user or system the least amount of access needed to do their job. So when you're adding a new field, don't give it to all profiles or all page layouts. Really be selective and think about, does this user really need access to this field? Do they need edit access? Same thing with things on the profile. Do they need access? Does everyone need access to this app? CRUD access, so create, read, update, delete, modify all, view all. Does everyone need all those permissions, or really only the people who need it?
I'm just going to jump in here and say that a lot of times, I agree with you 100%, Jen. And a lot of times, whether it's us as the person who's creating that configuration element or the business person who's asking for it, we think that we're being generous and kind by saying, you know what, let's make it open to everyone. However, what that's doing is it's introducing clutter and confusion for them when they're in the system. It makes a huge difference when you're logged into a system and you only see those things that are relevant for your job and for what you do and for what you care about, versus having all kinds of clutter there that you have to sort of mentally sift through. It ends up becoming the equivalent of having like ads when you go to the New York Times article, and your brain has to sort of filter out all of the nonsense that's on the screen just to be able to do your job. So you're actually not doing them a favor by being generous about it and giving it to everyone. You're actually causing harm.
Oh yeah, I worked in an org that had a contact page for advisors. So these are people who sell mutual funds to other clients, and all the fields for all the users was on this contact page. So it was like a CVS receipt where you're like scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And you're like, where is my data? Like, why do I have to see all this other noise in order to get my job done? Right? Yeah. So least privilege access, again, if, Sally needs a certain permission, but everyone else in that profile doesn't need it, don't add it to that profile. Add it to a permission set or a permission set group and give it to those selected few, right? Your integrations. I've been in so many positions where people have said this integration account needs to be a system administrator, and I will challenge them every time. And when it comes down to it, it didn't need to be a system admin. It needed only like a handful of permissions, but because it's such an easy way out to say all integrations need to be system administrators. So really challenge that when you're working with a third party vendor and they say this integration account needs to be a system administrator. All right. And then have those security policies in a document that is shared with everyone. So they all know here are the boundaries that I need to work within in working in this org. Also identify design patterns that are scalable and minimize technical debt. So there's lots of ways that you can build something in Salesforce. And the right way is not always necessarily the quick and easy way. So for example, if you're working with flows and you have a flow that is similar to your original flow, you can clone it, tweak it for that scenario, and then you have another scenario that's similar but different, and then you're cloning and tweaking it. And then you go from one flow to 15 flows, right? And now you're maintaining all 15 flows. And let's say that you have to make a change that's common to all, you're updating 15 flows. Or you could spend the time, so more upfront design time, to build a more generic flows that covers those various scenarios that you can reuse. And ultimately, it takes less time to maintain. So both solutions gets the job done, right? It fulfills the business requirement, but one design is more scalable and reduces tech debt in the long run. So I know some of you out there might be new to Salesforce. So you're like, how am I going to come up with design patterns? You're not going to know those day one. You could learn them over time as you become more experienced in Salesforce, or you could partner with someone who is more senior, a Salesforce peer, to help you identify those patterns. But if you're first learning out, you're not going to be able to know what those are. So it's okay to learn over time. And once you get in the groove, start documenting what those good design patterns are. And you want to implement best practices. So avoid things like hard-coding IDs. I cringe every time I see a demo that has a hard-coded ID. I know it's an easy way out, but there are a lot of reasons why you should not hard-code IDs. We're not going to get into it in this episode. We can talk about that later. But things like building flows where it makes sense to use subflows, no DML actions within a loop and flow. So things like that, document those best practices. So again, it's shared with others. And then leverage the benefits of the overall platform. So our guiding principle at my former company was using clicks before code. This is using the benefits. Your company bought Salesforce for a reason, right? You want to use the benefits of Salesforce releasing 3 times a year and reaping the rewards of those new features. If you were to go completely custom code on Salesforce, you're not going to be able to, if we did territory management and you, for example, built your own territory management tool, you would not be able to reap the benefits of whatever enhancements we made to the territory management tool. Now, I know there are times where custom code is required, and that is perfectly fine, but I would think as a rule, we should think about using as much out of the box of the platform as possible unless you have specific reasons to go code. And also with each release, we may introduce new technology that is GA, generally available. So I would consider using that generally available technology to replace the older technology to avoid incurring tech debt. So for example, with the upcoming change of the announcing the retirement of workflow rules and process builder for Flow, right? So you're in there, you're continuing to create workflow rules and processes. Those are old technology. Flow Builder is a new technology, the one that will be the end state technology. So you're incurring tech debt by continuing to create new workflow rules, knowing that that's in place, right? Because you're eventually going to need to take those workflow rules and processes and move them into Flow. So why do double the work when you could start with the new technology?
Couldn't agree more.
All right. So think about establishing a design review process. So at my previous firm, we were a team of admins that supported 8 Salesforce orgs. And our teammates would work on the various orgs and work on their individual work items, design them, and implement them as they see fit. There was no information sharing between the admins or learning from one another on the team. So establishing this design review process gave us the ability to knowledge share with one another, right? Because lots of times what we'll do is we'll have a business problem. So the admin or developer will present the business problem and solution. And oftentimes those business problems aren't unique, right? You may have worked on solving the similar business problem for another org that your colleague is working on, right? And again, multiple ways to build things in Salesforce. And it's a way for an admin and developer to get feedback on the design for any design improvements they need to make, and as well as learn from others. So it's the opportunity here for new or junior members to learn from more senior members on the team, and an opportunity for more senior members to learn new things from others. So chances are, whatever you're building, someone else on the team may have already done it before, right? So you could potentially be able to reuse what they've built or use it as a starting point so you're not starting from ground zero. All right. And then we also established a built solution review. So you may have envisioned a certain design for that business problem, but as you go and build it, things happen and you ultimately build something that's different than what you envisioned. So having an as-built review with your peers allows the team to identify any tech debt or defects from your standards or your guidelines, as well as give you the opportunity to provide a knowledge transfer session to your team. Because at this point, you've built the solution, you're about to go live with it, and it's an opportunity for your team to know what's this new enhancement that's going in. Because if it goes into production and let's say another team supports production defects, they're going to want to know what this feature is all about. Okay. And lastly, what you want to think about is establishing deployment rules and a deployment process for your org. So depending on the size of your org, think about how many teams you have working in your org. And that will help inform how many sandboxes you need in your overall deployment strategy. So if you have a smaller team, you want to think about, does it make sense for your each admin or developer to have their own sandbox where they can play with, and then have the next sandbox up be a merge sandbox where you can have all your configuration and your code merge from those individual team sandboxes or individual person sandboxes in, and then it's really a way to test that you've identified and pushed up all your config, your code changes, made any manual changes that you would need to make that aren't deployable. And then you also want to have a staging environment. And this is most often your full copy sandbox, which is a copy of your production with the data that you last refreshed it with. But it's the copy that's closest to production where you can perform your user acceptance testing and test any integrations prior to production deployment. Also determine whether all the changes needs to be made in a sandbox first, because there might be changes that could be made directly in production, but limited changes. All right. So I'm thinking about things like user management. You wouldn't create new users in a test sandbox before you actually make them in production, right? Or modify their access. Any data changes would normally happen directly in prod, new data, updates to data, but things like creating new list views or modifying list views, reports, if they're not creating new custom report types or dashboards that are maintained by the user, could be done directly in prod. You don't need to stage them and then deploy them. So really, I go through and identify low risk items that can be made directly in prod and not have to go through that whole deployment cycle. And
Excellent
others,
points.
for sure, make in a sandbox first. Do not ever make a change in automation directly in prod, because you may be touching data and manipulating it in the wrong way, right? And then you can't go and undo those things.
At scale.
Salesforce doesn't allow you to update code changes directly in prod for a reason, right? You want to do those in a sandbox, test them, make sure it all works out before moving to prod. And then also determine how often you want to make those changes into production. If they're small changes, can you do them daily? Or on a weekly basis, while the larger ones go into a 2-week sprint or a monthly sprint, right? But once you deploy them to production, don't forget about communicating those changes to your end users, whether it's a newsletter, an email, a short and sweet email you sent out, or in Salesforce using in-app guidance, where they go to the page and you can do a prompt that highlights what the new features are that they should be aware of. Or you could do like a short video snippet or a cheat sheet that you can share, but definitely communicate those changes to users so that they can reap the benefits of what you built and deployed for them.
Excellent
And
advice.
that's all I got for governing your org the right way.
Amazing. I want to call out one thing in particular that the truth is, every slide that you shared there's a lot to unpack, a lot of fantastic wisdom to unpack there. So just because I'm about to call out this one thing, it does not necessarily mean it is the most important, but I think it really touches on a very common pain point that a lot of people have, especially when starting their career as a Salesforce admin. So you mentioned earlier about consider having multiple sandboxes. Neither Jen nor I, for those who are watching, neither of us are suggesting, oh yeah, anyone who says they want a sandbox, give them a sandbox. No, we're not saying that whatsoever. However, let's take that point in particular, and especially to apply it to someone who is learning how to be a Salesforce admin, and they have some baseline, some credentials. And when I say credentials, it may or may not be a certification. They might have gone through a whole lot of training and they're still studying for the admin certification exam. Yet they have demonstrated some competency and over-the-top enthusiasm for getting their hands dirty and being a Salesforce admin. It is worth considering. I'm not saying I automatically just give it to them. It is worth considering to give them their own individual separate sandbox. So you're cloning whatever the configuration is at the moment and creating a sandbox for them. And this way you are making them a system admin in that sandbox only, not in production. And in that sandbox, if they feel that they need to, because a business person is asking for it, or they want to test something out, to build some automation, to build some dependent pick lists, to create different page layouts, whatever it might be, you can safely partition out that sandbox just for them, where anything that they're going to do is not going to have a negative impact on production. And then to the point that, Jen, that you made earlier, by then migrating that configuration update into a shared sandbox where it gets further tested, and we can get further validation that these changes are not, in fact, going to break anything else that we have going on in production, then we can go ahead and move it into production. So that is a great way to help give people that satisfaction and allow them to really grow with the training wheels to learn on the job. But we're also minimizing the risk to any damage that they could potentially introduce into the live production org. Jen, thoughts on that?
Absolutely, 1,000% what you said.
So if you happen to be watching this and you are that person who's relatively new in your Salesforce career and you are begging, pleading, demanding for system admin access and nobody is giving it to you, change what you're asking for. Ask for your own sandbox and have it refreshed. You decide for yourself if you want or need it refreshed on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, whatever it is, depending on whatever it is that you're doing. To what extent does it truly need to reflect today's current live configuration from production? So go ahead and leverage that as a negotiation tactic. Don't be too surprised if you are told, sorry, we're not going to give it to you. It could be that there truly aren't any available sandboxes to give you. I mean, that would be a little surprising, but you never know. So it could be that there aren't any available sandboxes to give you, but it could also be an indicator that at your current place of employment, maybe there isn't that much room for growth. So take that into consideration as well.
One thing to note, if you've learned something on Trailhead that you want to play around with in your org, that's a good example of requesting a sandbox. Do not play around with anything you learned on Trailhead directly in your production org, please.
There are so many horror stories of people doing that. Especially setting up my domain. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the second segment. Jen, you ready, right?
Yes.
Let's do this. Okay. So now Jen is going to be sharing with us some 3 really cool new enhancements associated with Flow. Go ahead, Jen. It's all you.
Okay. So I'm going to cover the new Flow Trigger Explorer, Trigger Order, as well as the beta tool Migrate to Flow. But before I move forward, I need to show the forward-looking statement that everyone has come to know and love. So base your purchasing decisions on current Salesforce features and functionality. I will be showing you features that are not yet in production, so they will be coming in your spring 22 release, coming next month. And we'll be making some statements on features that are not yet available. All right, so let me get out of this and go into Salesforce. All right, so the first feature we're going to talk about is Flow Trigger Explorer. And this allows you to view your object, record-triggered flows, and orchestrations in one place where you can see the flow versions and take actions to either activate or deactivate. So this new piece of functionality is available on the main flow setup page or the record-triggered flow, individual record-triggered flow. So we get to flow by the quick find, and we're going to navigate here to flows. And this is the main setup screen. So here you see the new button for Flow Trigger Explorer, or we're just going to go into a record triggered flow because you can access it that way as well. Bring that up, and from here you can also click on Open Flow Trigger Explorer. for the cupcake order, that's my custom object that this record triggered flow is associated with. So we're going to click here. Same way as if you clicked it from here. This goes to the Flow Trigger Explorer. It remembers the last object that I was viewing, as well as the record status. So we can view record trigger flows and orchestrations based on whether the record was created, updated, or deleted. I select deleted, but this pulls up all the objects in your org that you could have record triggered flows or orchestrations on. You can also type the object and that will pop it up. But we're going to stay on cupcake order, my custom object. And here I'm showing all the record triggered flows and orchestrations for when a cupcake order record is updated. So they're organized by fast field updates, which is another way of saying before, say, record triggered flow. We also have actions and related records. That's another way of saying after save flow. And these are any actions like sending an email or updating another related object. And then we have record triggered flows that are running asynchronously. So here you'll see that we're listing out, I only have record trigger flows here, but orchestrations would appear as well. And you're able to see what version I have and the status of that record triggered flow, whether it's active or inactive. And then when you take a look at the drop down, you could either select to view flow details and versions or open the flow directly. And by clicking on the hyperlink here, you're opening the flow directly as well. So we're going to take a look at flow details and versions for this flow. And you can see the API versions, the different flow version numbers. So I have version 6 in draft, but the one that I have active is version 4. And from here, you can just quickly, with a couple of button clicks, activate or deactivate a flow or open a flow. So that is the Flow Trigger Explorer. So it really allows you, rather than look at the list view, be able to, per object, per the status, take a look at everything associated with it. Now, the next feature I'm going to talk about is a trigger order. And many of you out there who've worked with Flow may have this specific design pattern in place where you have one before save, one after save, one delete record triggered flow per object. So that uses subflows within it that allow you to control the order of executions for your flow. Because right now, for example, the actions and related records, record triggered flows, these can fire in any order, right? I can't specify that if they're all individual. Well, now in Spring 22, you can control the order these record triggered flows fire with these individual record triggered flows. So you don't have to go and maintain these massively long record triggered flows per object. So like the one before save or after save, you can continue to have these individual ones and specify the order. So that's cool. So let's go into, we're going to open up this flow so I can show you where you can specify the trigger order. So you have to go to the properties of the flow and into advanced properties. And the trigger order is a new field that appears. So in this field, you're going to order your record trigger flow by giving it a value from 1 to 2000. Now, any record triggered flow that does not have anything in this record order field will run as they currently do between 1000 and 1001. So I do want to note a couple of things here, that to avoid having to reorder every single time you create a new record trigger flow, we recommend that you space out the numbering order. So by tens or hundreds. So, put in the order 10, 20, 30, or 100, 200, and 300. And that gives you the ability to just add them in between, and you're not numbering them 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the fifth one comes that needs to go in between two, and now you have to reorder the whole entire thing. So that's that's triggered order. And a couple things to note is right now you cannot view the list of flows in, let's go back to Flow Trigger Order Explorer. So right now these are shown by flow label, right? So they're listed alphabetically. So right now from this interface, you can't see what the trigger order is. But do know that it is on the roadmap for you at some point in a future release. We couldn't get it into this release, but you will be able to dynamically drag and drop these record trigger flows, and those will reorder them for you. And you'd be able to see them in trigger order. So right now that's not available. We wanted to get this out the door for you, but know that the team is working on getting that into a future release. All right, and so the last feature I wanted to show is the migration tool. So if you haven't heard already, Salesforce has announced that we are moving away from workflow rules and processes, and we're moving towards one declarative automation tool, and we will eventually retire workflow rules and process builder. So if you haven't heard of that, we do have a blog post that I worked with Diana Jaffe on, the PM for record triggered flows. And you can find it on the admin, Salesforce admin site by going to blogs, and it is our top trending blog post. And this will give you a Q&A of all sorts of things that you need to know about what's happening with workflow rules and process builder and flow builder. So take a look at that. All right, so going back here, so in Spring 22, to help with the whole migration of workflow rules to flow, we have created a new tool that will be available for you in beta. So in the quick find, we're going to type Migrate to flow, and it also appears under the process automation section. And this is a beta tool, which means it doesn't necessarily have all the bells and whistles yet. It's not generally available, but it's something that we wanted to get out to the door so that you can start using it. And we'll be continuing looking to improve this in future releases. This is just the first release of this tool. So the purpose of this tool is for you to be able to migrate your existing workflow rules to a record triggered flow in a couple button clicks. And this allows you busy admins to quickly migrate them to flow. So this tool will also optimize same record field updates by upgrading them to a before save flow, which is much more performant. So we're just going to take content update and email workflow rule, and we're going to migrate it to flow. Well, one of the limitations, and I mentioned this is in beta, we currently cannot migrate any workflow rules that contain a task flow action. So you're going to see this if your workflow rule contains that. But let's take a look at another workflow rule, contact update, and I'm actually going to click on that so that you can see what this workflow rule does. So here, our criteria is when a record is created, anytime it's edited to meet the criteria, and our criteria is mailing city equals Boston. We're going to send an email, and we're going to do a field update that takes the mailing state province and updates it to MA for Massachusetts. So that's our flow, our workflow rule. So we're going to take that, and I'm going to say migrate to flow. You can also use this drop down and say migrate to flow. They do the exact same thing. So it's going to take a couple of seconds to do the migration, and once it's completed, we'll show you 2 steps. We recommend testing the flow first, and you can open that in Flow Builder. And once you've tested it, then you can activate it. So in this one button click, that will deactivate your workflow rule and activate your flow. So we're going to just take a quick peek at what the record triggered flow looks like. And here we have an immediate action, which takes the mailing state and updates it to MA. Sorry, I missed a step. So we have it on the contact object where a record is created or updated. And we have this thing called scheduled paths, which I had something on there to have it fire after 30 days when a contact is created or updated. So that updates the description field to test. And then this sends an email alert. So this converts your workflow rule to flow. You might want to change the names of these to make it more user-friendly, but in a couple button clicks, we were able to update a workflow rule from a flow. And so with this tool, sorry, moving screens. Okay. So with this migration tool, you'll be able to migrate a workflow rule to a flow that has field-based criteria, field updates, email alerts, outbound messages, time-dependent workflow actions, and rule criteria formulas that are set to true unless that evaluation criteria is also set to created or anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. What this tool doesn't do right now, and I've heard people ask this in the community, is does this tool migrate multiple workflow roles to a single flow? And it does not.
That is one of the questions that came in, by the way, now during the chat.
That?
In the chat, that is one of the questions that came in now. Live.
See, so I looked in my crystal ball and I knew it was going to be asked. So it's not on the roadmap, but doesn't mean that it can't be. So if that's something that you're interested in, tell us about it. Go to the idea exchange, create an idea, have people vote on it. And if it's important enough and it gets enough votes, that's something that the team will look into. So I do want to note that I do recommend that you take your workflow rules in your org and review them and don't do a lift and shift and move them over to flow. I had an exercise that I had some spare time at my previous company. And this was before I even knew about the announcement that workflow rules was being retired. I was tired of seeing workflow rules in my org because we're flow heavy. So I was going to take the initiative of converting my workflow rules to a record triggered flow. And these are workflow rules that we've had in our org for 5+ years. So I met with my business users and I'm like, okay, I'm going to move these over. And it's a good thing that I reviewed them with them because there were a handful that we didn't even need, that they didn't even know existed in the org. That they're like, our process shouldn't be doing those things. So I was able to retire a handful of workflow rules or make tweaks to existing ones to move over to flow. So don't just think that configuration that you've had in your org is still, valid. Do that validation with your users before you take the effort to move them to flow. Great.
Love it.
All right. So those are my 3 items.
Amazing. Let's move over into the Q&A segment because we actually really have a lot of questions that have come in. So I'm excited to start unpacking them. Okay, so the first one actually has to do with Pardot. So even though the issue has to do with Pardot, I definitely have some thoughts on how to potentially unpack this one. So let's go ahead and take a look at this question. Let me move it down to the appropriate area on the screen. So this was actually broken up into 3 different posts. So basically what we have here is I have created a Pardot user account last week. The user hasn't activated their Pardot account, which resulted in showing never-ending loading icon whenever they access Pardot Lightning app. The user says, this is part number 2 of 3. The user says that they didn't receive any activation email from Pardot. How can I activate their account or resend the activation email for Pardot? I have admin access to both Salesforce and Pardot. This user has a Salesforce account and has all Pardot permission sets required. Only need Pardot activation email. So I'll jump in first, and I don't know, Jen, if you have any thoughts on this, but anytime I encounter an issue like this, which is not unique to Pardot, it's any type of really activation or confirmation email, and the person that is supposed to take action, receive it and take action on it, says that they're trying and it just doesn't work. I found 9 times out of 10, as annoying as it might be, set up a quick screen share session and go through it with them. Maybe they're looking in the wrong place. Maybe it ended up in their spam folder. Maybe they set up a rule in Outlook where it goes into a hidden folder anytime it contains the word Pardot. You have no idea what it could be. It could be a million different factors. If for whatever reason they do get the email and they click on it and nothing happens, now at least you're armed with more information where maybe there's some kind of a block on their browser, on their email system, on the computer, on the VPN. So that's the road that I would take. I just had this issue yesterday with one of my clients who was struggling to access a Sandbox. And I had no idea why. Like, it should have been very simple, very straightforward. Turns out, did the screen share. We resolved it within 30 seconds. It was done. Jen, thoughts? Oh, your camera. Oh my gosh. I think we just lost Jen. Jen, I don't know if you're there. Her camera's, I think her browser just killed. Oh my gosh. Hold on. Let me text her and tell her to reboot if she can join back. Lost you again. And now her screen share disappeared. I think it's her computer. Almost all of the other questions are really for Jen. So I'm hoping that she is able to join. If so, we'll see, we'll see her in a moment, I hope. Here we go. Jen, thank God you're back, because I can't answer these other questions. They're all about flow.
See you later, David.
I don't know what happened. I'm like, oh yeah, Jen strategically decided to ditch me at this point. Okay, so there's a bunch of questions. Carolyn's got this one. Would you please repeat what you said about a blank trigger order and it being numbered between 100 and 1001? Not sure I understand.
So if you don't go through, so for your remaining record trigger flows, if you don't go through and put any type of order, then it just assumes they will run within the 100 to 1001 range.
Super. Jennifer's got this issue. I just tried the migration tool on 4 workflows, but it didn't work for any one of them. So I'm wondering whether or not it's possible that the workflow rules that she tried did not meet some of the criteria that you mentioned before, because you did mention some criteria that the workflow rules have to fit X, Y, and Z.
Jennifer, I would be curious to know, and we can take this offline, if you saw any type of error messages when you're trying to migrate. And if you didn't, I'll probably want to find out from you more details offline. And so we could take that back to the PM and figure out why it didn't work.
Okay. Next, Dharmesh has a question. Jen, can you please tell about how to debug platform event triggered flow? I'm having a tough time to debug that.
So I don't know if you tried looking in the debug logs, if you went that far. and none of the information was helpful. We can also take this offline if you want to ping me on the Trailblazer community, and we can try to figure this out. It's probably more than what we can cover in this session.
And I'm wondering whether or not it's simply about not knowing how to use debug, but also I've never tried to debug a platform event triggered flow. So there could be some nuances there. Okay, Tim's got a question, which is, when will Migrate to Flow? Let me make this a little bit bigger. When will Migrate to Flow appear in our org? We want it, and we want it now.
It will. So you should, if you have a sandbox that is scheduled for a preview instance, you should now be seeing that in your preview instance sandboxes. But in your production org, it should be coming sometime next month. I would go to the trust.salesforce.com and check your instance number to see when your production org will upgrade to Spring 22.
Amazing. Next question from Matt. Can you talk about run asynchronously and what that means?
Yeah, so that's a fairly new feature that was introduced with the last release in Flow. And it allows, so basically it's a process that runs in the background that you don't need to wait to continue on with something else. So it could be a process that you're engaging with an external system, for example.
Excellent. So, by the way, there's a lot of chat on the chat feed regarding the Pardot activation issue that we talked about earlier. Folks have a lot of feedback, thoughts on that. Matt is bringing up this issue, which actually I did not realize, but in a way it makes sense. We had issues with one-time links not working because Outlook now checks the links for phishing before delivering them. So I'm wondering if Outlook blocks it, where does it go? Like what? And how to get around that? Because I don't, as the admin, you're not seeing that URL to even cut and paste it to send it through Slack or something else. So I don't know.
I'm wondering if they have to engage their network folks and.
Yeah. Oh, right. It could, right. It could be at the corporate level. So you know what? So if that's the case, what I would try as a workaround, to temporarily switch the email address associated with the account to make it a different email account, a non-work email account, which I cringe at that, but okay. Dana's got, and we're going to wrap it up shortly. Dana's got, this is actually a really good question. Any governance recommendations around account hierarchy? So like if it's a headquarters versus a particular division or location, like a franchise, this is very common with enterprise companies. So if you have, let's say, Home Depot, and you have Home Depot headquarters, Home Depot marketing, Home Depot customer support, versus, let's say, individual stores for Home Depot. So Jen, your thoughts on that? So we're not really talking about the configuration. We're really talking about data management.
Yeah, it's more like you want to talk to your higher users to see how they want their accounts organized. I'm trying to think if I've run into this instance in financial services. I think
I totally have in financial services in particular.
Companies were a firm and then different branches, and they ended up being a master company with the individual branches as sub accounts.
Right, parent-child. So just for many people who don't realize it, and it could be it's just not on the page layout, so you forgot or didn't really know that it exists. Natively out of the box in Salesforce, on the account record, there is a lookup record for parent account, and it simply looks up to another parent. And then you actually have a cool hierarchy functionality where when you look next to the account name in Lightning, you can, actually, I think in Classic also, come to think of it, you have the little org icon, like an org chart icon, and you can actually see the org hierarchy. Also from a reporting perspective, show me all opportunities where the parent account is, let's say, Home Depot headquarters, whatever we're calling it. But like I mentioned, I happen to have a lot of experience with this as it relates to financial services in particular. But you can apply this to any industry, really. And the naming convention that I have typically found most helpful is by starting off. So if it's a headquarters division, I would have the name. First, you're starting with the name. So no matter what, the name is always going to start with, let's say, it's Home Depot or Citibank or Wells Fargo or Fidelity. It doesn't really matter the industry or the company name. You're going to start with the actual company name, space, and then dash, space. And then if it's a headquarters, and even within headquarters, you could have multiple divisions. So you would have space HQ, marketing, space HQ, sales, space HQ, and you can keep going on and on. But if, let's say we're now talking about branches, aside from having the parent account be, let's say, Wells Fargo HQ, in the naming convention, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky still, and it's pretty subjective, to just say New York is not going to suffice, because there could be 75 locations in New York. And it could be that there are 10 locations on Madison Avenue in New York. So depending on how granular your data set is, it might suffice to say just New York, and everyone knows that it's 123 Madison Avenue. But if there are many on Madison Avenue, for example, you might need to get even more specific, either by using some kind of a nickname or by, as painful as it is, referencing the street name in the account name, that's painful. That's really painful. So it's not perfect, no matter how you slice it. But those are my recommendations on like going down that road by having a naming convention. And by the way, you also have to be careful, because you're limited by the number of characters you can have in the account name. So last question, then we need to wrap up. And this is actually a really good one from Matt Henry. Is there any word on what will happen with approval processes? By the way, this was the first question that came to my mind when the announcement on workflow rules came out. Like, hey, what about approval processes? I would so love to see this migrate to Flow somehow, and then get them out of workflow actions.
So currently there is nothing scheduled for approval processes. However, there also is orchestrations that you could consider. And this is if you have approval processes that involve multiple users and you have multiple screens and things like that. So you might want to consider Orchestrator as a potential tool. But right now, there are no plans to retire approval processes as they are today.
And now we know. Hopefully soon. After workflow rules are taken care of, then approval processes can get upgraded. But in the meantime, we're not complaining. We're appreciative of the fact that workflow rules are getting forced to be upgraded, and hopefully approval processes will too.
Oh, I should probably plug. So Admin Preview Live is going to run on February 4th. And so we do have the PMs for Record Trigger Flows, Diana Jaffe, as well as Abhishek Sharma, who will be presenting on Orchestrator. So if you're looking for more information, and we will have the opportunity for live Q&A, you can ask them, the PMs, the questions directly.
I got to get some of those PMs on the show too. Definitely. All right, we need to wrap it up. We are past the top of the hour. Jen, thank you so much. You're always such an amazing source of information, of advice, of guidance. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
My
this
pleasure.
was so much fun, other than dropping and coming back.
That's what keeps it fun and exciting. And it wouldn't be a live show if we wouldn't have a mystery of like, will Jen come back? What will David talk about if Jen doesn't come back? I could find stuff to talk about, but it's not the same as having you here. So thanks again, and I'll see the rest of you in the audience. I'll see all of you next week. Jen, I hope to have you back again at some point in the future. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye.